Right, I think we can get started. Welcome everyone to this virtual book talk event and in conversation with author Debra Barnes and Dr. Toby Simpson. My name is Christine Schmidt and I'm the Deputy Director and Head of Research at the Wiener Holocaust Library. We're pleased to have you with us this evening as we explore this very recently published book, I think just last week, called The Young Survivors, a historical novel inspired by Debra Barnes' family history. Debra will be in conversation with the Wiener Holocaust Library's director, Toby Simpson. Pardon me. For those of you who have not heard of us, the Wiener Holocaust Library is based in London. We were founded by a German Jewish refugee named Dr. Alfred Wiener, who began to collect and disseminate information about the rise of the Nazis as it was happening in interwar Germany. His collection and his scholarship and his activities have formed the basis of our work today. And we are actually the largest collection of Holocaust-related material and published documents in the United Kingdom. And we host a series of events and exhibitions and have taken up the challenge posed by the pandemic to move a lot of our activities online. So we're very happy to those of you who have never attended events at the library. And of course, we issue you a very warm welcome. And we also extend a warm welcome back to those of you who have joined us in person and also online already. So just a bit of housekeeping before I introduce our speakers. The formal remarks of the evening, the in-conversation between Toby and Debra will take place over 30 minutes, after which time we'll have some time to take some questions. If you have questions, you can find the chat feature at the bottom of the screen. If you just type in your questions, you can enter those in throughout the event. If you are logging in, excuse me, from YouTube, you can type in questions there, and we'll be monitoring YouTube also for questions, so please feel free. If you have any technical difficulties, just try to direct your question to the panelists and we will try to help you out. And yeah, I think that covers everything. So without further ado, now to our speakers. Debra Barnes studied journalism and has been a regular contributor to the Jewish News. Since January 2017, she runs a project for our longtime partners, the Association of Jewish Refugees, to produce individual life story books for Holocaust survivors and refugees. She lives in Northwest London with her husband and daughters, and The Young Survivors is her first book. And I've had the recent pleasure of helping her a bit more with some of her family research, so it's really a pleasure to be able to host her event tonight. Dr. Toby Simpson has worked at the Wiener Holocaust Library for 8 years and was appointed director last year in September 2019. Prior to his appointment, he has performed in a variety of key roles, including setting up the library's exhibition program, leading major translation and digitization projects as our head of digital, and in recent times leading on fundraising as head of development. And he's, of course, excelled in all of these capacities. He's also an avid reader, so I'm sure tonight's conversation will be lively and illuminating. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Toby.
Thank you, Christine. And I'm so delighted to be here with you, Debra. And actually, it's lovely to hear mention of the AJR. And it was through the AJR, of course, that we first met when with you, you're working on the My Story project. And it's really fascinating for me to think about the work you do with AJR, especially around second generation issues, because first of all, congratulations on writing such a fantastic, compelling book that is so moving. And I just wondered what it was like for you to write this book and how you really made the decision to begin the process of writing it, considering that it can't have been an easy project to embark on.
Thank you, Toby. It's lovely to be here. And actually, I think it was about a year ago, more or less to the day, that we met at the Wiener Library for an AJR event. So that's gone pretty quickly. It's been a busy year.
Yeah, my goodness.
It has, eventful, let's say. Yes, certainly. I mean, my mother was a Holocaust survivor, and growing up, I knew that she had been a hidden child in France and that she'd lost much of her family during the Holocaust in Auschwitz. But to be honest, my mum was born in 1938. She was very young and she really didn't remember very much. And obviously it was a very painful subject. So although she didn't hide the fact that she had lost family members, we didn't talk about it in the home. So it was an uncomfortable subject, which was avoided so as not to cause upset. It was a taboo subject, if you like. And so I didn't read books on the Holocaust. We didn't watch films or documentaries. I still haven't seen Schindler's List. And it was just avoided. This very much changed in 2006. What happened is that a cousin of mine was surfing the internet and found a picture of a book written by a lady called Denise Holstein. And on the front cover of the book was a photograph of a group of children. And in that group was my mother. And the book was called, I Will Never Forget My Children of Auschwitz. I actually have a copy, which...
I've not seen this, so...
It's in French. My mother is in the back row. And I'm not even sure my mum had even seen a photograph of herself as a child of that age. Then it came as a real shock. And so she made contact with Denise through the publisher of this book. And she went to the south of France where Denise lived, and she went to meet her. Denise was 10 years older than my mum, and when my mum was 6 in the orphanage in Paris, Denise was looking after her, and she was the monitor, and she believed that all the children in that photograph had been taken to Auschwitz and died, but my mother hadn't. My mother had survived. My mother had a twin sister who's also the photograph who was taken. I'm not going to tell you what happened because there's a very similar story in my book, and I don't want to give any spoilers, but it's a very tragic story.
But that intriguing moment provides the opening of the book with the character based on your mother, Georgette.
Yeah.
And I just wondered if you could say a little bit more about that moment and how it came about. And you've said already a bit of the backstory to it, but I suppose it must have had quite a repercussion for you and for your family, for your mother to meet Denise. Yeah,
I mean, before she went, I think she was very hesitant about, should I go, or should I just leave this hidden? And I think she was a little concerned, but in the end it turned out to be a really positive experience because Denise was able to tell my mum something about what life had been like for them in the orphanages, and she told her that they were kids. They were very small kids. They were 5-6 years old. They just played with each other, and they didn't ask for their parents. All the children in the orphanages, their parents had been deported, and so they were all effectively orphans, but they didn't realise that they didn't ask about their parents. They didn't know any different, and they didn't suffer when they were there. So I think that was a positive. And for me, it opened the door for me to be able to speak about it more and ask more questions. However, Mum still didn't remember any details. And so I started doing some research, and that's when I started my research, but very lightly. Again, that changed in 2010. Mum very sadly died. And then a couple of years after that, I took redundancy from the job I was doing at the time. I had some time, and I thought, okay, I'm going to do more research. I took some journeys to Paris and I went to Metz, I went to Louveciennes, which is where the orphanages were. I started blogging about my research, and through that I was contacted by other people who were able to help me. I also went to the south of France myself, and I met Denise, and I was able to get information about the day-to-day life in the orphanages, which was really helpful. And I was contacted by a gentleman called André Converse, who's a French historian, and he very kindly took me to Louveciennes. He introduced me to other people whose parents had been in the orphanages as well. And we went to the actual buildings themselves, because there were two. They went to one and then they went to the other. I went to Paris to see the children's home where she first went to, and to the Shoah Memorial, where they could get me some more information as well. So, so I started doing research like that, and people started contacting me. One gentleman called Fred Katz contacted me after an article was published in the Jewish News, which I wrote, and he told me that his family were also from Metz and had been relocated to the same village near Poitiers that my mother went to. And he was born in the same year as my mum, so we think that they probably played together as children. And he told me the story about how his brother had been run over by a jeep of Nazi officers. Really tragic story, and he allowed me to write that in the book as well. Very moving story. I think you've read it, so.
I have. Actually, I wanted to ask you a bit about, you mentioned having opened the door and learned more about the ways in which your family's experiences also link to other people's experiences. And there are quite a few moments in the book which really bring that to the fore. You talked about the family being moved away from Metz, which is, for those who might not know, is on quite close to the border with Germany.
German border,
and then.
Yeah.
And there's another really dramatic moment in the book where where the father of the family is arrested, which again was part of a much larger wave of arrests. And I just wondered what that was like for you, kind of going through that process of discovering all of these terrible moments in the history of Jewish people and their survival, where it was possible in France.
I mean, it was really very disturbing, if you like. I mean, I knew growing up, I only had one set of grandparents, and I knew that the others had died. But finding out the date that my grandfather was arrested, and I don't know if you're familiar with this book, which is
yes, I have seen that book before. Yes.
So it's like what I call an old telephone directory, but it's literally lists and lists of all the convoys that left France. I mean, it's horrendous, and I found all my grandparents' names on there, and other members of the family, and there's so much information available that it's terrible, but at the same time it's compelling. I feel like I'm honoring their memory by finding out this information and telling a story which was similar to theirs, so that people are aware of what happened in France, because I don't think it's something that is spoken about very much. There's a lot spoken about Germany and Poland and the camps and everything, but how many people realise that 75,000 Jews were murdered from France, and the collaboration of the French people, some of the French people, and
indeed, and it's interesting. There's so much to piece together, and the picture is I suppose tragically never fully complete. But one of the things that also stood out to me was the way that you were able to describe the period towards the end of the war, and that also the beginnings of the family themselves trying to piece together what had happened to other family members, which of course was common to millions of survivors. And I just wonder whether we could just draw out a bit of that, just in terms of what you're saying about the collaboration of the French, which isn't widely known, and then other details that I think any reader of your book will encounter and really learn from about, for example, the orphans who survived in France, and the fact that, you know, one of the reasons that the French were, I suppose, helpful in trying to find orphans new homes was because they didn't want the orphans to really expose what had happened in France.
Exactly, they wanted to get rid of the evidence. Yes, it's really shocking. Last week, the 22nd of July, was actually the 76th anniversary of convoy number 77, which is it was the last convoy to leave Drancy for Auschwitz, and it was almost entirely full of children who had been taken from the orphanages, including this group of children here. Including my mother's twin sister and her brother, to the gas chambers. And this was weeks before the liberation of Paris. And this happened because the Nazis knew that they were losing the war, and the Allies were coming, and they wanted to get rid of the evidence. And the evidence were the children, the orphans, whose parents had been deported 2 years before, and yes, and they were helped by the French, who also needed to get rid of the evidence. I mean, it's really a very, very sad story that I think a lot of people don't know about. So I hope I bring it to people's attention.
You certainly do. It's also not a simple thing to investigate, and there's so many potential obstacles or dead ends that you could, or blind alleys that you could be led up in your search for information. So I just wanted to take the conversation back a little bit to what you'd said about your that moment where you were more able to explore your family's past with your mother, and I just wondered a bit about, as you were starting to conceive of the book, how did it take shape?
Well, I mean, I studied journalism, and I think I'm one of many, many people who always had the ambition to write a novel and see it on the shelves in a bookshop, which I did for the first time today, so that was very nice. So I kind of, but it's very difficult, because writing about something tragic and so personal, on the one hand, you think, I don't want to take advantage of these victims and of the hardship of others. But then on the other hand, you want people to know what happened, as so many people say, keeping the memory alive is the best tribute that you can give someone. I was on a conference, a Zoom this afternoon with the Claims Conference in New York. And one of the people from the Claims Conference said to the audience, keep sharing your family's stories, because it inspires us to keep working. And so part of the work they do is obviously providing for the Holocaust survivors who are still alive and providing money and social care, but it's also for education. And he was, I don't remember the exact statistic, he's based in New York, but he was talking about the percentage of millennials in America who can't name one concentration camp or have never heard of the Holocaust. I mean, it's frightening. It's frightening. So one of my ambitions, one of the reasons why I wanted to write a novel, because someone could say, well, why didn't you write your mother's story, you know, as a memoir or something, was that I wanted it to reach as wide an audience as possible. I would say, and I've been told by people who know, that it is suitable for young adults. You know, I think I would love to think it could be read by school children in schools as a way of showing what happened. But it was very important for me that I made it engaging, a page turner. If we look at the three so I'll just talk a little bit about how I wrote it, which is that I've written it in the first person, but through 3 different characters. So as my publisher said to me, I chose the most difficult way to write it. And I don't know why I did that. And I did hesitate.
But you pulled it off.
But I pulled it off, yay, hooray. The eldest brother is when the parents, and I do talk at the beginning, I do write about what life was like before the war and at the beginning of the war when the family was still together. But come July 1942 begins the dissection of the family, where the father is first arrested and then the mother, and the children are left by themselves, 5 children. And the eldest son is suddenly given the responsibility for his younger siblings, the youngest of which are 4 years old, twin girls. And he has these terrible choices to make. I had to put myself in his head. You know, he had these terrible choices to make. How did he know if he was making the right decision? You know, ideally, what would our parents have wanted? So he has this internal conflict all the way through the book. Has he made the right decisions? Then we have the middle brother who has lots of adventures. He goes from school to school and gets up to some, you know, fun stuff. And so I think, and almost provides a bit of comic relief during the story. And then the youngest child, who was inspired by my mother, is too young to even know what's going on. So we see the world through her innocent eyes. So at the beginning, she's like, "Where are my parents?" But then after a very short time, she's forgotten them.
Well, without wanting to give too much away, I do find that it's a really effective device in the book, the introduction of that third voice and the way that it develops. But that must have been especially challenging, given that character is based on your mother. So how did that feel, sort of creating that voice?
Yeah.
Voice?
Well, so in my mind, I said, okay, this is a character. These are characters. This is a fictional novel, and these are characters, and that's how I dealt with it. Because if I hadn't done that, it would have been very emotional, and I wouldn't have been able to do it. So that's how I dealt with it. So,
well, as a reader and a sort of avid reader and writer yourself, you mentioned in your afterword being sort of influenced by reading The Lost Wife by Alison Richmond. And I've not read that book, but I'd be intrigued to after this. But I just wondered if you could maybe talk a little bit about your own literary inspirations.
So in 2010, I was invited to join a book club, and I said to them, I'd love to join. However, I have to tell you, I don't read books about the Holocaust. I don't do anything about the Holocaust. And I can honestly say in the last 10 years, that has really changed very much so. And The Lost Wife was the first Holocaust novel that I read. And it was such a beautiful book. It really had a very deep impact on me. And it's a novel, it's a love story, but the characters, or some of the characters, are in Theresienstadt, and it just really made me think, wow, that I had to read it because I had to find out what happened. At the same time, I was learning a lot because I didn't have the knowledge about the Holocaust that I have now. And I just thought, well, that's the way to do it. I thought that's how it really affected me. I don't think there are that many stories about France. There are a few which I've really enjoyed, like The Nightingale was a very good book, and Sarah's Key. But I wanted to, none of them are told through the eyes of a child or children. And from the reviews, from the advanced reviews that I've had on the book, I think that's what people are really enjoying. Is that it's from this point of view, this new point of view.
I do really think it is quite a new point of view, especially in the way that you tell the story. And one of the things that I feel is really fresh about it is the way that you depict really vividly kind of Jewish life in France within this family. And there's a very moving scene at Rosh Hashanah. And I was just trying to think if there were other examples where we kind of have a fictional account, which, as you say, is a really engaging narrative, but it also really starts to think about what life, everyday life, was like for Jewish people living in France in this terrible time during the occupation.
Yeah. I mean, so I think people who don't read a lot or don't have family who live through it, I think when they think about the Holocaust and Jews in the Holocaust, they think of them as victims. You know, they think of the people in the camps, emaciated bodies and things. But I think it's really important to remember that people were living full lives before the war. They went to the cinema, they went out, they went to dinner parties, you know, they drove cars, they went on holiday, they had really full lives, and they were very well read on the whole. And most of them, obviously I'm generalizing, but also I meet a lot of German and Austrian refugees through my work, and really they are very cultured, and opera and philosophy and art and all this stuff. So, and I think it's really important to remember that not to just think about Jews in the Holocaust as the victims.
And what's that been like, sort of working more and more through your work with AJR with survivors and refugees, and talking to them maybe about the work that you've done with this book? How have they reacted, if you've spoken about it with them?
Well, I haven't spoken too much, because when I meet them, I'm usually helping them write their story. So, you know, I want it to be about them. But I mean, I have now told people that it's there might be some watching, I don't know. But yeah, I mean, everyone's really supportive, obviously. I think, like I said, anything that can help increase awareness of what happened, help the fight against Holocaust denial and the continuous anti-Semitism that's going on, is a positive. So yeah.
And well, it's interesting that you touch on that, because perhaps it's not really something that you'd want to go into much depth about, but I suppose in the midst of such turmoil in the world, and also, you know, there are seemingly it seems like that barely a week goes by without another terrible story about anti-Semitic abuse, or so I just wonder if that made the process of writing this book especially difficult for you, the kind of environment that you've been that we've all been living in.
Well, I mean, I have to say I have never had an anti-Semitic attack aimed at me personally. I'm very happy to say. You know, that was something I thought, oh, should I write under a pen name? You know, what if people come and find me? But I don't know, I'm just an author writing a novel, so I really would hope that wouldn't happen.
And are you enjoying being a sort of a newly published debut author? Is that kind of, I mean, it's sort of a dream fulfilled in a way, isn't it? I mean, I'm envious.
Absolutely. It's very exciting. It really is a dream come true. I mean, I'm in my first week, and it's been a week of firsts. Yeah, it's really exciting. So, but having said that, it's a very competitive market. I mean, so many books were published on the same day as mine. I know my book was actually delayed by a few months because of the lockdown, coronavirus. You know, bookstores were closed. They're only just reopening now. I have to say, I went to this really lovely independent bookshop today in St Albans just to sign them some copies, and about, I mean, 4 or 5, I was only in there a few minutes, and 4 or 5 customers walked in, which was very, very nice to see, because we want to support the independents. But yeah, I mean, I hope people are gonna have got more time to read books.
I think they do. Yeah, well, I've definitely appreciated some of the quiet time in lockdown for reading. It's been one of the better things about it. But I just think, you know, you mentioned about possibly some of the people you've worked with at AJR being in the audience. It seems possible to me that there might be some aspiring authors also out there in the audience tonight. And I just wondered if you have any tips about, you know, if you're somebody who's always felt they've got a book in them, Given your experience, are there any hints and tips, kind of things you've learned along the way?
Am I the hits? I mean, if it's a story similar to mine, that sort of genre, and this is what I tell the people who help me write my storybooks for AJR, I always say start with a timeline. Start with a timeline, and then fill it in as you go along. That's how I work. I don't know how people wrote before word processors. I'm showing my age. Before Word. With find, you're writing something and you suddenly think, oh, what happened? Did that person move away or something? And you can easily find them, but you do have to be organized. And there are different software that you can buy, but I didn't use it. I just used Word. But it's a big project. Took me 5 years to write this book.
And how about the research side of it? I mean, of course, you use the library's resources, and I'm sure you'd recommend people popping in to make use of them. But are there any other resources that you used for your research that sort of stood out?
Well, the internet. I mean, so if I was writing something, and I suddenly thought, okay, what was the weather like that day? You can actually put in the date in 1938, and it will tell. So the day that the first chapter is based in. And I thought, well, what was the weather like then? Because it was April, so it could have been raining, it could have been warm and sunny, and that kind of just getting some information about that, which is really easy to get, really helped me put myself in that place and then sort of describe what was going on, if you like. So yeah,
I think another really useful potential resource is kind of listening to the accounts of others. So I suppose in your case there was listening to your mother and to Denise, and but I suppose when we're talking about stories told in the first person from different perspectives, there's quite a lot out there in terms of people telling their stories, and there's a lot to be gained out of listening to those stories, sort of, I suppose, in detail, again and again, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, so there's the AJR Refugee Voices, obviously.
I just wondered about you, sort of, when you were listening to some of those accounts, if you did listen to things like AJR Refugee Voices, did you sort of listen to them? Did you use the transcripts?
No, I didn't repeat listen to them. I'd listen to them and maybe just, I'm not going to write their story, so maybe just get a couple of things that would help me set the scene, if you like. So listen to some testimonies from the Shoah Foundation as well. There are keywords that you can search and you can access those. So that was really useful. And talking to people, going to meet Denise and talking to Denise was probably the best move I made. A couple of days in the south of France, it wasn't much of a punishment, but it was amazing, and it was so positive. And she's amazing. I mean, when I went to meet her, she was late 80s, maybe even 90 by then, and she was drinking champagne and smoking a cigarette, and and it was just, after all she went through, she was in Auschwitz, and it was just wonderful to see. So a very positive experience. But yes, absolutely, talking to people and being able to ask questions is if anybody's thinking of writing their family story, for example, or something based on their family story, and there's someone still able to talk to them, record it.
Start now.
Start now. Yes, start now. Absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
Well, actually, Denise sounds like an absolutely amazing woman, and again, not to give too much away, but the way the book concludes is so moving, and I really urge people to read it, because and they won't, everything builds up to that, and the way you set the scene at the beginning sort of sets it all in motion, and the rest of the book leads towards that concluding moment, which is incredibly moving. So I just wondered if you would be happy to read that opening passage for viewers, so that they can get a sense of how the book sort of begins. And then after that, perhaps we can take some questions from the audience if you're happy with that, Deborah. Does that sound okay?
Happy with that. Yes, okay. So this is Juan Lepan in June 2006. I checked my watch for the umpteenth time. Jacqueline was due any minute. The ceiling fan had an irritating click, which wasn't helping to quell the churning fear in my stomach. The sound of children's laughter came from outside. Through the window, I caught a brief glimpse of them playing in the garden, which made me flinch and look away. Instead, I looked in the mirror. The woman I saw there was very different from the 6-year-old girl with the shaved head who Jacqueline had last seen and assumed dead. I sat and thought about my life and the lives that had been lost. I thought of the awful choices Jacqueline and my brother Pierre had been forced to make at such a young age. How can someone choose between saving his mother and his infant sisters, or between saving themselves and saving the children they are looking after? I jumped as the telephone on the bedside table sprang to life. Alan answered it, exhausting most of his French in one short conversation. Oui, d'accord, merci. He put the phone down and turning to me said, "She's downstairs, my love." My heart was racing as we left the room. I took a sip of water on the way out. My mouth was completely dry. The journey down one flight of stairs to the hotel lobby seemed unbearably long, as though I was travelling back through the years, back towards the horrors of the past. I felt faint and clung to Alan for support. For so many years I had survived by blotting out the terrifying memories. My family had learnt not to talk of those years in front of me and was scared what it might do to me if I had to confront the nightmares. How many times had I nearly cancelled this trip? In the end, my desire to see my beloved Jacqueline had triumphed, but I'd been in a state of constant anxiety since I made that decision. What would she look like? Would we even be able to talk? I'd buried my knowledge of French along with the memories, and Jacqueline's English was, in her own words, very small. I had so many questions to ask, so many memory blanks, but I didn't know if I could even talk about the ugly past. As I walked through the hotel lobby, the slight figure of Jacqueline Goldstein approached me, and we embraced for the first time since 1944. I was weirdly surprised by the tiny, fragile old lady she had become. The last time we had seen each other, 17-year-old Jacqueline had towered over me. She'd been like a mother to me, and my sister all those years ago. I was overwhelmed as she stood with her arms open, waiting for me. We held one another close, and I wept as I remembered the innocence of our last moments together.
Thank you, Deborah. That was really, really lovely to hear. I'm going to take some questions from, I'm going to take some questions from the audience now. And the first one comes from Janine. So Janine says, I also do research on children and youth. Did you find yourself thinking about child development and psychology as you researched and wrote?
Well, I guess I did without thinking. I'm thinking about child psychology and development because I'm not a psychologist, but no, I mean, I tried to think, listen, we were all children once. So I tried to, and plus I've got 2 children. Well, they're older now, but I did try and remember what they were like at that age. It's probably easier than remembering what I was like myself. Yeah, I mean, other things as well. So my mother was a twin and she lost her twin sister. So I tried to, and the character in the book the same. So I did some research in twins who lose their twin and how it feels for them and things like that. So yeah, I did try and get it as real as possible. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to now turn to a question from Vanessa. Vanessa's curious to know if you had any real blocks or difficulties in your research, any information that you really wanted to obtain but that was hard to obtain.
First of all, hello, Vanessa. I think I know who you are. I haven't seen you for a while. Hope you're well. Yeah, absolutely. There is one missing piece of the puzzle, which I still haven't been able to find out. So my mother was in a a convent for the last year, from 1944 to 1945, and I have not been able to find out where that convent was, and I have tried, and I know I contacted Christine, was very kindly helping me a couple of weeks ago, and we did a search with the ITS, with the International Tracing Service, and actually found a new piece of information which I'd never seen before, which I couldn't believe. But it just shows that, and if you're missing a piece of information, just keep looking, because there is new information being released still now, all these years later. So it came up with so when I write about how the families found their other family members who were still alive at the end of the war, their names, they're all lists, everything was lists. And I got the list that my mother's name was on, and where she was in 1945, when her brothers were able to find her. And I'd never seen that before, and I didn't know the name of the place, but I can only imagine she was there for a short time, but still it was incredible. And I believe there is someone at Yad Vashem now who is doing a study into hidden children in France who are in convents, and he is trying to help me find out where my mother was.
And didn't he mention that there, again, it's that thing of time being of the essence, because there are still just a few people who remember, for example, the dress of the nuns in the different convents. I think perhaps even 99 years old or something like that. Yeah,
that's what the guy at Yad Vashem said. Did your mother ever speak about what the nuns were wearing? What was their habit? Because this lady who's helping him is 99 years old.
Amazing.
But I can't. We don't know anything about what they wore. But yeah, absolutely, time is of the essence. Definitely, do it now. Don't delay.
And then just I might mention, just for anyone who hasn't heard of the International Tracing Service before, this is it's now called Arolsen Archives, but it's the largest single archive of documentary evidence of the Holocaust anywhere in the world, and it's really, really huge. 30 million documents, and navigating it is pretty tricky, which is why generally you need the assistance of a professional to really search it. But it includes a huge number of records from camps and ghettos, and across, not only that, but many other types of documents that were gathered in the aftermath of the Holocaust and the Second World War. And the library has a digital copy. There's also, as I said, Arolsen Archives has a copy. There's a copy in Washington and at Yad Vashem. And it's just the most extraordinary resource. The scale of it is immense, and I also pay tribute to the skill and the knowledge of the many researchers who work with it, including our researchers at the library, Elise, Christine and Mary, who have incredible knowledge of the archive. So I just thought I'd explain what that is for anyone who's not aware of it. Yeah,
well, 10 years, I wasn't aware of it 10 years ago. But it's amazing. If there's one thing we know, well, we know a lot about the Nazis, but we know that they like to keep records of things. And you say 30 million, but then if you think there were 6 million murdered, but there's
I think it contains the names of
documents. There might be like thousands of names on one list. So
yes, I think there's 17.5 million individuals named, which is just, again, mind-boggling.
Yeah.
So somebody's just pointed out the Arolsen Archives International Centre on Nazi Persecution, formerly the International Tracing Service. That's right. So if you want to find out more, you can. There is a page on our website at the Wiener Library as well, and you can contact us. But you can also visit the Arolsen Archives website. If you type Arolsen Archives into the web, you'll find a lot more information. We've got a question from Claudetta, who's wondering, did the writing process help you to process your own memories?
My own memories? No, I don't think. No, I don't. Sorry, I don't know.
You can't think of a moment when you were maybe writing and thinking, oh, now I think of that. Maybe I don't know. Like maybe in your relationship with your mother, perhaps. I'm not quite sure.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. What it did make me think about was absolutely my relationship with my mother, and you know, it made me just. I mean, I was. Being second generation can be very complicated, and an area I work on with AJR, and I know there's a lot of trauma around. It's very difficult to think, you know, that your mother went through these horrific things when she was a very small child, and that's going to have an effect on anyone. I mean, have an effect on the child of the person, but obviously it's going to have an effect on them as well. And it just made me feel even more like, you know, like, what can I do to stop the pain for you? Nothing. I can't do anything. It's a very complicated subject, let's just say. But yeah, it absolutely made me realise that. I don't know. I think the best, like I said, the best thing, I mean, this book is a tribute to the 75,000 French Jews who died, but it's also a tribute to my mother. She managed to live a very happy, full, loving family life, which is incredible, bearing in mind what she went through. You know,
I think it's a wonderful tribute to her and to the 75,000 Jews who died. I think you really summarised that really well. And anyone also who second or third generation, just another shout out to the great work that the AJR does with second generation and with third generation. So if anyone is sort of has experienced similar issues and isn't sure about who to contact, then definitely get in touch with the AJR because they do fantastic work in this area. Okay, we've got a question that's kind of looking to the future, which is, what are your plans? Where will the writing of this book take you next? Will there be more fiction from you?
I think so. I'd like to think so. I'll say yes. Listen, it's been very well received. It's less than a week since it was published. This was a really difficult book for me to write, but it was the book that I had to write. It was the bittersweet experience. So if I was only going to write one book, that was it. If I write another one, it will be easier in so many ways.
I do think it's kind of it's quite a mean question to ask an author though when they've just finished a book. You know, we want another one.
Yeah,
well, I've just done this one.
Plus, I'm working full time at AJR, so you know, I'll do it without a deadline, if you like. But yeah, I mean, listen, I've met so many, maybe like 50 or 60 My Story projects finished and currently in the process as well. So I've heard lots of stories, incredible stories. There's always incredible stories, and there's always that pivotal lucky moment, at least one, usually more. For my mother, it was having measles and being in the hospital at a specific time, and then relying on the kindness of strangers to hide her. But everybody that I've met through AJR has that pivotal moment which saved their lives, and you know, very sad stories, and I've learned so much that I feel that yes, it would be a shame not to write another book. So yes.
Well, one of the clearly people, I think the question, just again, I wasn't trying to criticize the question about what you're doing next. I think it's all coming from the place of people wanting more after really enjoying this book. And we're actually getting quite a few who are asking about whether they're able to get a signed copy. So I just wonder if people do have a chance, if
I'm ready. Yeah, absolutely. I don't know how we can do it.
Well, I don't know either, really. I suppose if people want to email the library, if they do want to request a signed copy, then maybe we could try and organise that. I mean, we like, it may take a little bit of time, and we couldn't do large volume, but we'll help in whatever way we can.
Yeah, lovely, thank you. Yeah.
Great.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I've got a question about your mother's survival, and you mentioned about how it was kind of not talked about in your family, and I just wondered if we could talk a little bit about what that silence was like for you, and where, you know, how you understood it as a kind of a means of your mum coping with what happened to her.
Yeah, I mean, she was always very honest about, like I said, so there was a little photo in a frame of this family from 1938, and with twin girls sitting like babies, and I knew one of them was her. We never knew which one because they were very similar, see, twins. So she was always, you know, that was never hidden, but she honestly didn't know. So, you know, there was nothing I could do to, you know, I just had to respect that until the opportunity came for me to start asking questions and find from other people and find out more. So
it sort of brings us back to the place where we started off, and it's just sort of amazing to me that there's such a sequence of events, isn't there? That you know, that almost has no beginning and still isn't over.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just I was just thinking also back to the Laskowski brothers, the short story that you've also released, that goes back still further into the past and the experience of your great grandparents. I suppose it must have been in Poland in the 1920s and before. And I don't know. It's just it's almost like there's always still more to discover, isn't there? It
was actually my grandparents. So my grandparents were born at the turn of the century. Yeah, so they were both born in Poland, and experienced, their families experienced anti-Semitism, and they went to France to escape that, as did so many. And some of their siblings came to England, and some went to America, but they both decided to stay in France, and my grandparents met and married in France. So that's something also that I write about in the book. You know, the children think, what would it have been like had our parents gone to America? You know, would life have been so very different for us? And
that's one of the wonderful things about fiction as well, isn't it? It can kind of offers so many opportunities for you to ask questions, not only from your own perspective, but almost put yourself into somebody else's shoes, which opens up a whole different set of questions.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many gaps in the story that you know, so when I realized I wasn't going to be able to, and I wanted to write this novel, I started to research what was going on, you know, in to other people, and sort of and write fill in the gaps, as we say. Technical term, fill in the gaps.
It is a technical term.
But well researched.
Yeah. Well, we've got one more question from Kate, which I think we might have as our last question, which is about whether your daughter's relationship to this story. And I suppose you don't want to sort of be too personal about it, but again, maybe it's the broader way of asking this question is that question of the effect through generations.
Yeah.
I just wonder if any reflections that you have on how your daughters relate to what you've done with your mum.
I mean, I think a lot of second generation will agree that you don't want to force this on your kids. Okay, so, and not everybody's interested, or not everybody's interested when you're ready to talk about it. And that's something that when I'm doing my storybooks for AJR, I say to people, oh, well, we'll give you a copy for each of your children. And they say, oh, they're not interested because they never ask about what happened to me during the war. And I said, well, I think you know, just mention it to them. And then when I talk to them again, they say, I told my son, and he's so excited because he always wanted to ask me, but he didn't want to upset me. So he didn't ask, and I thought he wasn't interested because he didn't ask, so I never spoke about it. And there is a real vicious circle there. So having a book that you can pick up when you're ready, I think helps break that circle and just takes the pressure off. Like, you don't have to sit down and have this talk. You can just, like, say, you know, read this book when you're ready. And if you start reading it and you think you're not ready, then close it and come back to it. A bit like giving up smoking, I think. That's like, well, you've got to be ready. It's got to be the right time, right? So both of my daughters are older, one 16 and 27, but they both read it and they both really enjoyed it. And I have to say, my 16-year-old, she was walking around, so she was watching before, I think, in another room, really enjoyed it. And it's about the only book she sat down and read for years, which was very special for me. So yeah, I think it's been good. Plus, you know, obviously they're proud of their mum. Oh, she's putting her thumbs up.
I really like what you said actually just then about books and the special quality they have of being able to kind of return to them. And obviously that's something that we love at the library is and maybe it's something with this subject as well, that there's something so important about being able to meet it on your own terms and in your own time. Yeah,
I remember speaking to somebody very early on I asked them if they wanted me to do a book, and they said, well, they did the testimony, one of the testimony projects, not Refugee Voices, a different one, and they were presented with this video at the end, and they had an image in their head of all their children and their grandchildren all coming round and watching the video together, and she said they weren't interested. I mean, they weren't interested when she first received the video and wanted to do it. And she was really very, very upset and disappointed. And so she said, I don't want a book because the video brought me enough you know, disappointment. But I think a book is different because it can sit on the shelf and it kind of calls you, come read me, pick me up, open me, read me.
Well, I know that a lot of the people who've been listening tonight are going to be really tempted to pick up the book, and they can get it already on Amazon. And or please do get in touch with us if you would like us to try and arrange a signed copy to be
I'd be delighted to sign copies. Yes, it's fun.
Well, this has been a fantastic conversation, and thank you so much for joining us, Deborah.
Well, and thank you for having me, Toby. It's always lovely to chat with you.
It is, isn't it? Well, it's always really, really nice to chat with you. And I just have to say, just massive congratulations. I just think it's such a big achievement and a great book. And we're really proud to have it on our shelves in the library.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. It's been really, really great to have you all this evening. And if anyone would like to make a small donation to support the library and its events, then you can do so at wienerlibrary.co.uk/donate. The slide is just coming up on the screen. We'll be running more online events like this in the future, so you can check out what's coming up on our website. So thank you, everyone, for joining us, and thank you especially to Deborah, author of Young Survivors, fantastic book. Get hold of your copy now. I look forward to speaking to you soon, Deborah.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.